Recently, I checked on how I can use ChatGPT for coding. And in particular, I want to talk now about how I can use it for learning, what I think is the more efficient approach and more fun, so you actually learn something properly instead of always getting really weird code that never compiles and you don't know why, just getting frustrated. And first I want to say how I wouldn't use it. So for example, if you say help me to learn about list, this is not really understanding anything because I didn't give it the context very correctly. View in SwiftUI, I should have told it the proper language. Okay, it also gives me a lot of boilerplate code, like it is a more SwiftUI friendly design. It's a SwiftUI component. Anyways, you create it like this, and as you see, it gives you a lot of code. But here, for example, it doesn't give me the full struct and the body. So if you try to copy paste this over, it doesn't really work. A lot of the times, if you ask it to write code, it makes quite a few mistakes. And then you need to figure out why it doesn't work, especially if you're a beginner, you don't know. For me, it's fine because I relatively quickly now see this. Let's start a new conversation where I can show you the better approach, which is to first look for code that you want to learn about and you want to have more explanations about. For example, you go for a tutorial and you get confused. So this is one of mine on my website where I defined a struct food. So this should actually compile. I copy this and take this over. And if you start and explain this Swift code to me. So again, I say which programming language, or you can also add here the import statement Swift. Now it gives you a very long and detailed explanation. This could help in order to improve the return here. It's a good idea to also give more context. For example, I am beginner in Swift, but I know Kotlin. Okay, maybe I should have done the opposite way. But at least in this case, if you already know Kotlin, then it lets you explain it to... It only will explain you the parts, hopefully, that are not the same in Kotlin. And you see here, it gives me a nice information about the static function. The static keyword means that the function belongs to the food struct itself rather than an instance of food. This function returns an array of food objects. So it already knows, okay, I have to talk a little bit about static. And it already suggests me here, to understand this better, you could compare this code with similar code in Kotlin. So as you see here, instead of a static func, they use companion objects. So a better approach, it seems, especially with this comparing, you don't need to tell it if you don't want to have all the rest of the blah. Translate this code from Swift to Kotlin. Okay. And here it also tells me stuff like struct is similar to Kotlin's data class. As you see, it doesn't tell me much about all of these properties that I probably already know when I come from one language to the other. It highlights the difference, which is this companion object or this static function. This approach from going from one language to another is with conventional methods. If you read a tutorial, it only talks about this one language. You would need to write a lot of tutorials to explain the difference from one to this, from Kotlin, from Python to Swift. But with ChatGPT, you can directly translate from one to the other and build on top of your knowledge. So it's more fun because you just need to fill in the gaps of, oh, this is the same, I can rely on the already existing knowledge, or this is different and I have to look into this topic. Read about companion objects or static. If you're a beginner and you don't know anything, then the result that ChatGPT gives you can be very different. And instead of here saying, oh yeah, explain this to me, you can also do a more specific question or explain to me what the static is with very basic language, or give me another example for this. Where would this be used for? If I have an app, where would I actually use this for? Oftentimes, especially with this kind of language specifications like static or what is a boolean or a string or an array, usually you only see them isolated, a couple of code snippets, and you don't really know why is this there. And just being able to finally ask, yeah, where would I use this, makes a lot more engaging and fun, because then you actually see you can actually relate to it much better, and you can also access it, you store it better, and then when you're in the situation, one of the use cases, you remember easily what was there useful for. For example, asking about optionals. Why would I use optionals? They're used a lot in SwiftUI. I'm just asking, I want to learn about Swift optionals. Give me examples of where they are used in SwiftUI. So this is an optional binding. This is not going to work. Okay, sometimes it's better. Okay, sometimes it doesn't really make sense. This is a good one with the optional image, because if you specify the image name and it doesn't actually exist, like in your asset catalog, it doesn't exist, then you don't here return anything, then there would be nil returned. And instead we can, if there's nothing in there, instead of usually it would just doesn't display anything, we would add here a placeholder. This might not be the best example for an actual app, but it's a good illustration of why we have null values. Optional navigation, yes, it's also used a lot in navigation. If you have one of these cases, and in this case, because I asked for multiple examples, you can then ask it to expand on one of them more, and maybe say, oh, what would be the different use, how would the code look like if I use a non-optional value? What would be the advantage? If you see the actual code without an optional, you very quickly, I'm guessing, realize how annoying it is to not have optionals or how useful they are. So it's usually, you would say, expand on number 3. And now it actually gives me a correct, yeah, this is a much better example. It doesn't use the same one. So now it gives me a navigation view. And when the user taps here on one of the selected items, I'm setting this, and I show a sheet when it's set, when it's not null. And here it says, is an optional item, allowing for the scenario where no item is selected. When no selected item, then the selected item is nil, the sheet is not presented. So it's either the scenario of something is there or nothing is there, nil is there. So I guess you have to, sometimes it's better to first, with this kind of example, it's better to say, give me 10 examples where an optional is used in SwiftUI. And then instead of reading through all of this, just something not so good, you just say, okay, expand on one of these points. And then the explanations are much better. Then additional point, you saw that when I was here on this blog post, I had to copy paste it over. But there's an extension which is Harper AI. This is a Chrome extension where you can directly talk to the code on the page. You can also use Microsoft Edge, because they also have a sidebar now where you can start a conversation. So now I need to remember what is in here. For example, I can ask, because this is also talking about list stylings, what is list styling? And then add the page content, which means that now this is a placeholder and it just takes the content of the whole page and puts it into ChatGPT, so you don't need to copy paste. And in this case, as you see here, I didn't tell SwiftUI or Swift, but because I had the content of this page, it knows list style in SwiftUI refers to the visual appearance and formatting of lists created by the SwiftUI appearance. Some of the available list styles include plain, sidebar, inset. Then you have inset, groups, and inset group. And you can also change the raw inset, separator colors, header prominence, raw background color, and more. The good thing about this plugin is that you have a very good tutorial. Usually they're quite good. You have a very good main content, and you just want to ask side questions. For example, maybe you're just asking here, what is actually this state property in front? What is the system image? Where does it get this image from? This kind of things that you quickly, in the context of the blog post you're reading, the content you're reading, you just want to have some additional questions. So it's really follow-up questions that you can ask, which is nice, because especially when you learn yourself, sometimes some of these questions are really annoying to find the answers to, and you might have a lot. This is basically your personal tutor that you can directly ask things to. It might not work for everything. In this case, it's good because you have a high quality main content and you can just add follow-up questions. More detailed things, you can ask questions of what's the struct? What's an initializer? Why do I not have here initializers? Maybe you already know about certain stuff. Unfortunately, the plugin doesn't really work very well with Apple tutorials. So it's always, where is it? Yeah, it's up here. You see this tiny one. The good thing is the data stored locally? Now here, okay, this is not very efficient. It's reading this, but when you use this plugin, it actually uses ChatGPT, so you can just use the free version, and it adds a new chat. So as you see, it actually, maybe I added too many. It pasted all the contents of this web page in this chat. That's what we saw over there. It just doesn't show me the main content. The first one basically just summarized everything, the tutorial, persisting data, this is what it does. You can also do summaries of whole web. Maybe if you find a solution on Stack Overflow and you don't want to read through all of these comments, you can also summarize this or explain it easier. Or you can also adapt it to your current problem. Okay, just ask it, does this site actually solve my problem? In this case, is this data stored locally? Yes, in Scrum app, the data is stored locally on the device. The app uses the file system to save the data on a file named Scrum stored data in the documents directory. This allows the app to persist the Scrum data between launches. And then in here, you can also continue asking more questions. This is probably very good for the Apple tutorials because they don't have so much information. Sometimes it's missing the why you actually do stuff, what's behind this approach. But yes, you can see, you can just continue asking more questions about this with ChatGPT. I hope this gave you an idea to go beyond the most obvious approach of just let ChatGPT write some code and explain this to me, to use existing code with ChatGPT and ask more questions and customize it to your level of knowledge. If you're an experienced developer with a lot of other background languages, you don't need as much explanations as a beginner. So let it know more things and use more follow-up questions, more questions that are related to explain it to me in a step-by-step manner, why you're using this, what's the difference between structure and classes, what's this keyword saying, or give me examples where this is used in an app, how would this look like if I use this in this approach instead of this in this. Let me know in the comments if you agree to my approach or if you have some other ideas of how to use it better. Like this video if you found it interesting. Until next time, happy coding.